Go. And now we are ready to begin. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. And as I posted in the chat, be aware we do have members of Ken's family from other parts of the country who are participating along with our COCPA members for Love Makes a Family. I'm going to ask Ken to introduce his daughters in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you all that this is your opportunity to participate as you are able. Turn your camera on if you are willing. You are welcome to and encouraged to post your questions in the chat, and there also will be time for open conversation as well. We are scheduled from noon to 1:15 Mountain Time today, and this is, now let's see, July, August, September, October, November, or excuse me, December. This is our 7th See Me story of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are delighted that you have joined us. My name is Mary Medley. I'm the CEO, and I will be following along the chat so that if there are questions to ask along the way, I can keep track of that. And Ken, you and your daughters won't have to be talking and watching at the same time. So with that, please welcome Ken Richards and his twin daughters, born in Sierra Leone. Ken, take it away.
So I have Alicia in the gray and Aisha in the blue shirt, and they're joining us from their phones in the car. They were both working today, and due to COVID restrictions, they couldn't get into their buildings together. And so if there's any issues, they're next to each other and can share phones if they have to. At any rate, they were born in Sierra Leone and came to America in 2002 and have a great story to share. And so I'm going to start with a PowerPoint, and then I'll move on to having them read a story that Alicia wrote when she was in high school, and they've shortened it quite a bit for this program. And since it's both of their stories as twins, they'll each read a part of it as we go. So if it's okay, I'll take over the screen share.
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, and do that one. Okay, let me move this out of my way here. How many of us?
You've got the screen backwards, so we see the presenter view, not just the slide.
Okay. Let me change that. Stop share.
That's all right. This happens to me like at least once a week. So no matter what I do, it always shares the wrong side.
Share screen, and share that one. Now, is it correct?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, looks good.
Okay. How many of us really know the story behind the diamond in our engagement ring? If we do, how does it make us feel? If we were to ask diamond dealers or jewelry stores about the diamonds they sell, the storyline goes like this. We only sell diamonds that have been certified to be conflict-free under the provisions of the Kimberley certification process. This process was established soon after the Blood Diamonds War in Sierra Leone and Liberia, West Africa. It passed in response to the horrifying atrocities that took place there. Some of you may have seen a depiction of what happened if you watched the movie Blood Diamond, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Charles Taylor, former president of Liberia, became the very first sitting head of state to ever be indicted for war crimes against humanity by the International War Crimes Tribunal. He was also the first former head of state to be convicted for war crimes since the Nuremberg trial following World War II. The Kimberley certification process was adopted at Interlaken, Switzerland on November 5th, 2002, just 5 months after the UN sent in a peacekeeping force led by Great Britain. The goal of the certification process is to trace individual diamonds sold on the open market so that they can be certified as conflict-free. So just what does conflict-free mean? The terms conflict-free diamonds and blood diamonds are used interchangeably, but they aren't the same. Conflict-free means nothing more than a particular diamond was not used by rebel forces to fund a war. Unfortunately, it says nothing as to whether a diamond is blood-free. A blood-free diamond is a diamond mined by someone who may have been enslaved, tortured, raped, beaten, killed, or all of the above. In other words, it was mined using forced labor, including child labor. The truth is, diamonds are a commodity. Most can't be accurately traced back to their origin. They're regularly cut and reshaped as many as 10 times before their final sale. But as long as the proceeds from their sale weren't used by rebels to fund a war, they're still considered to be conflict-free, certifiable under the Kimberley process. Needless to say, it's relatively easy to obscure their origins with false entries in diamond registers. Just like in accounting, a great amount of trust is required to make the system work. So, should we even care about the story behind those beautiful diamonds that we purchase from exquisite retail stores? Diamonds promoted by an industry that has effectively led us to believe that more than anything else, they symbolize romantic love. We prominently display our diamonds so that others can share in our happiness. But consider this, more than 75,000 Sierra Leoneans lost their lives in the Blood Diamonds conflict, and over 500,000 of the country's 4.5 million citizens became war refugees. Children as young as 8 years old were abducted, drugged, desensitized, and used as combatants, forced to act as human shields. Forced to commit unthinkable acts, including the executions of family members. Refusing meant that these children would be maimed, killed, or both by their captors. Untold numbers of men, women, and children were tortured and maimed. Thousands upon thousands of hands, arms, feet, legs, and fingers were brutally amputated by rebels with machetes, fueled by the greed for diamond riches. Sometimes a leg was amputated along with an opposing arm to ensure a full disability. So maybe, can you tell me, should we care? In early 2001, our adoption agency, Hope's Promise, based out of Castle Rock, was moved to do something about the innocent children of the Civil War, children who are suffering unspeakable harms. My wife, Doris, and I had already adopted 3 children through their agency, children who are living in an orphanage in Vietnam. Even so, we had expressed an openness to do more. Then one day, out of the blue, they called me. They emailed me this picture and asked if we were willing to adopt these twin girls. Trouble was, Sierra Leone wasn't open to adoptions. We would have to blaze the trail together with a positive outcome, anything but certain. For several years, other people had tried without success to do something for these kids. The issue being that at that time, Sierra Leone was a very dangerous place. Life expectancy for outsiders traveling into the country could be measured in days or hours. But to adopt children from there, the adoption would have to be done from inside the country. Further, once the adoption was finalized inside of Sierra Leone, adoptive parents and their adoptive children would have to live there for another 6 months. Aside from the issue of staying alive during those 6 months, the process was complicated by the fact that during the war, the country didn't have a functioning government. Needless to say, the challenge was nearly impossible to carry out. Here's a picture of my mother-in-law, Pasita, and sister-in-law, Patricia, taken when they still lived in the Philippines. My wife, Doris, is a first-generation American, fathered by an American serviceman to a Filipino mother. Just 10 hours after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese army began an aerial bombardment of the Philippines, followed by landings of ground troops, both north and south of Manila. It was during this invasion that my wife's grandfather died, leaving his family in peril. Her mother, the oldest of her many siblings, was forced to find work to help feed her family. She found work at a Japanese restaurant where the owner happened to be a friend of her late father. As part of her job, she was required to learn Japanese, and that's what later saved her family. One day, she was followed home by occupying Japanese soldiers who caught her carrying home leftovers from the restaurant. After following her home, they forced everyone out and lined them up for execution. But it was her ability to speak their language that saved their lives. Later, she learned from her boss at the restaurant that Japan would be bombing Manila the next day. She led her family out of Manila that night. They traveled by foot to another province in the mountains, where they joined extended family, hiding in the jungle by day. She personally witnessed the Bataan Death March, a 63-mile march of 72,000 plus POWs from the southern end of the Bataan Peninsula. She also witnessed firsthand the liberation of the Philippines by General Douglas MacArthur. So it was in this context that when Hope's Promise called, we looked at each other and mutually agreed. We've been blessed in this life, and we know that we have been put here for a reason. So if this is what God has in store for us, then yes, we're all in. International adoption is complicated, even under the best of circumstances. We went as far as we could, to the point where it was impossible to continue without high-level governmental intervention. That's when we enlisted the help of Colorado Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, working with his incredible staff in Grand Junction. We sought a definitive governmental ruling as to whether or not adoptions could proceed by bypassing the strict residency requirements. We sought a ruling not just for our specific case, but for all the refugee children who might later find a home in America. Senator Campbell submitted a request to the Library of Congress for determination. In January of 2002, the State Department notified us that the Library of Congress had ruled in our favor. Additional progress was made in June of that year when the United Nations sent in a peacekeeping force. The UN peacekeeping mission was led by the British, as Sierra Leone had once been a British colony. Weeks later, in mid-August, we airlifted our daughters to safety, where they joined us in Senegal. They were evacuated by helicopter due to ongoing threats outside the city of Freetown. Roads and pathways were far too dangerous to travel, as UN forces had not yet gained control outside the city, and landmines still hadn't been cleared by peacekeeping forces. This is our new life in Colorado, less than a year later. In 2015, GE Appliances sent a film crew of over 20 people from around the country to our home in Orchard City. They filmed a commercial featuring our unique family. It became the first of a 6-story advertising campaign featuring diverse families from America called Our American Kitchen. They also chose to feature our family in this newspaper flyer that was sent out in some 300 newspapers in major markets all across America, from New York City to Denver to Los Angeles. So let me play it for you. Orchard City, Colorado. I like being close to nature. like being out in the country. We had traveled some and saw how much need there was and felt like we could adopt. They all know their heritage and it's all been a part of their lives. It is just like any family with 5 kids, as normal as it can be.
Life in America when we first came was overwhelming at first. I've depended so much on my sister that it was kind of hard to get used to the rest of our family. Just being from different countries and having different experience, we've had to learn to accept each other because we're all different in our own ways.
I said, what surprised you about America more than anything else? And their answer was, all of the happy birthdays. Everybody was celebrating a birthday.
So today we're making the Vietnamese spring rolls because we have 3 children from Vietnam. For Africa, we're making baked chicken in ground nuts.
Having dinner together is important for our family because during the day we're also busy and into our own lives. It's like the time your parents and you get time to bond.
There's been a hole in there, which I forgot about.
It's critical because that's when you get to talk to each other and we find out what's going on in everybody's life. Without that, I think that you lose a connection to your kids. Yes. I'm very proud of my kids and what they've done and what the future holds.
Blood doesn't always make family, it's love. I feel very blessed and lucky.
It's just great to see them grow up. It's really a blessing to see.
It's a Zoom thing with the Colorado Society of CPAs, but I'm going to cut it off here.
In 2008, Senator Ken Salazar's Compassionate Staff in Grand Junction organized a special naturalization ceremony just for our family. By chance, it was scheduled for the first day of school. After that point, all 5 of our kids had perfect attendance through elementary school. The federal magistrate, Gudrun Rice, who presided over the ceremony, wrote them an excused absence, which was granted. Now, let me introduce you to my daughters, Aisha and Alicia. In high school, Alicia wrote a short story about her life in Africa. But since she is a twin, this is really their shared story. So they're both going to read it to you. It's been shortened for this program to reflect and revised to reflect where they are now in their lives. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the girls.
Okay, hi. So this is my story or our story. Huh?
Let me stop sharing my screen.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Go ahead.
All right. So this is our story. It's called The Devil's Dance. Blood surrounds me like a red carpet as it soaks the African soil. Run. Voices scream at me, but my feet have forgotten how to move. Just seconds ago, my villagers were joyfully clapping their hands. Joyful cries quickly turned to agony as the rebels. No, those devils danced until Africa ran red. Their guns pointed at my people's hearts to silence their heartbeats. Machetes cut into my people's flesh to make their blood run dry. Their torches glowed red and hot as our grasses and homes were set on fire. I took off running. My 4-year-old feet ran in desperation. My family survived another day, but we lost our home to the fires. Others in my village of McKinley lost more. They lost their lives. With no how, my family was taken in by my uncle. It was crowded, and we were all given chores. Mine was to fetch water, along with my twin sister, Hasanatu, and my older sister, Yamari. We carried buckets of water, one in each hand, and another balanced on our heads. The hill that led to the water pump was very steep. Many times we would drop a bucket or two and had to go back to fetch more. There was never enough food to go around, and our stomachs were bloated from poor nutrition. The Civil War in my country started before I was even born. My country was cursed with a massive diamond reserve. It brought so much pain and hardship. The diamond rebels were devils, claiming riches for themselves while bringing terror and bloodshed to everyone else. The rebels also took our children to fight against its people. Child soldiers were forced to murder their parents, siblings, to assault their neighbors, and to torch villages they once called home. Hasanatu and I were taken to my uncle's house. In the doorway, a small, chunky man came with papers for my parents to sign. Mr. Bula promised to keep us safe. The next day, we woke up early. Mama said we were going into the city. We walked for miles, each of us taking turns carrying my little brother, Amadou. In the distance, we saw Mr. Bula sitting on a rock. Mama picked me up, and Papa picked up my sister. They held us close. I wasn't certain why, but I didn't mind. I hugged them back as I felt powerful hands pull me away. They were the hands of Mr. Bula. We fought him, but he grabbed us and took us away. That was the last time we felt our parents' touch. 2 years later, my sister and I were adopted and taken to America, not knowing what happened to our family, let alone my little brother Amadou. I would like to say that I came to America and became a changed person, but change took time. My past still haunted me. From time to time, I would go into shock or even pass out when my surroundings triggered a memory. Adapting to the American culture, language, education, and lifestyle was a huge struggle for me. Therapy helped me move forward and come to reality that this is my life now, and I needed to learn how to trust others.
For several years, I was angry at my biological parents. I had to discover the power of forgiveness before I could change myself. Eventually, I was able to forgive my parents for giving me up and the rebels for the forever scars they left. 4 years after coming to America, my adoptive parents found out through the American consulate that my displaced parents had survived the war and had looked for us. Our adoption agency traveled to Sierra Leone for some humanitarian work and met our family. We took photographs, drew pictures, and wrote letters for the adoption agency to give to them. Since then, we have stayed in contact with our biological family. Our hearts were heavy to hear that my brother Amadou had gotten tetanus from cutting his foot on a cooking pot and died, but we knew that he was at peace now. We lost connection with our family for 5 years. My older sister, Yamari, reconnected with us on Facebook using the internet access at the Christian missionary school she attended. God kept bringing us together. My family had gone through so much hardship in the last 5 years. Through my struggles and my talents, though my struggles and talents have shined. My sister and I joined speech and debate in high school, and I found my love for words and poetry. We went to the state competition in poetry, and 2 years later to the national competition in duo. Acting is where my emotions come out, being able to place myself in someone else's shoes and mind. Years ago, I could have never imagined going to school, let alone college, but I've made it. I have an associate's degree in science, and I'm close to completing my bachelor's degree in elementary education. Advocating for children is a big reason why we teach. I teach to bring inclusion and diversity into the classroom. Our story doesn't just end here. My daughter Olivia has taught me resilience, unconditional love, and to see beauty in our differences. As we are unique, so is Olivia. Olivia has albinism, which is a rare genetic condition that lessens the amount of pigmentation in the hair and skin. This condition is found worldwide in people of all sex and ethnicities. The lack of education and discrimination around albinism has led to the killing of those with albinism in several African countries. So much that a worldwide event was launched to promote the acceptance of albinism through the NOAH. On July 13th, of 2021, Olivia was invited to be in the film War of Colors. After seeing a picture on Instagram, a film director contacted me asking if he could use my daughter in a film. We would be flown to LA. Olivia played young DeAndre Forrest. DeAndre Forrest is a model and an actress in New York. DeAndre Forrest also has albinism and advocates for it. Being Olivia's mom, I'm constantly having to advocate for her in the classroom as well as in the schools where I get a lot of questions. So advocating for adoption as well as for diversity has become a huge part of who I am as a person.
I was older when I was adopted. Most people who adopt only adopt younger children, so I'm grateful that my sister and I were chosen. It's our journey to make a difference. My life has been walked on a broken road. My road didn't get paved until later in my life, but my struggles have shaped the person that I am today. I used to think that Africa was more than I could bear, but I see now that the good Lord doesn't give you more than you can bear. The events in my life were not God punishing me, but instead his miracle for my life. 10% of who we become comes from what happens to us. The other 90% comes from how we handle it. Through my pain and diversity, I have found my talents. It was learning how to cope that made my life beautiful. I am a child of Sierra Leone, and I am a survivor. Okay, that's the end.
Thank you. Go ahead and take the screen share again. I appreciate that, girls.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Let's see.
We all appreciate it.
Hopefully I'll get the right screen. Share. Are you seeing the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay. So here's a picture of Aisha Alicia and Aisha's daughter, Olivia. And a picture of them with supermodel Deandra Forrest. Both Alicia and Aisha are talented orators. They competed together in speech and debate and repeatedly qualified to compete at both state and national levels. But they're also artists, where they have placed in judged art shows. Here's one of my favorite canvases painted by Alicia. So now I'm going to open it up to questions, and I know Aisha and Alicia would love to hear from you. So feel free to unmute yourselves and turn on your video if you like and ask questions directly. So I will stop my screen share. So let's open up to questions.
First, Ken, thank you so much for raising your hand at a previous See Me Story event and saying, I think I have a story to tell too. And Aisha and Alicia, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful words and your unbelievably challenging story. It is a real gift to all of us to get to be with you today. Just as Ken said, I encourage you to raise your hand if you'd like, or to unmute yourself and ask a question, or post it in the chat. Here we go. Thank you, Caitlin. Caitlin asks, what was the hardest part of adapting to America?
For me, it would be change, just coming to a new country, having to adapt to new culture, norms, and then as well as having to fight PTSD. I would say having to like trust people and know that we were in America to stay and that it wasn't temporary and that we had to learn to adapt.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like for a child. much less the two of you.
I can tell you a small Christmas story. Their first Christmas here, they had never experienced Christmas or knew anything about Santa. And so one day my wife was telling them to be good so Santa would come, and their question was, well, what happens if you're not? And so she said, oh, you might get a lump of coal. And about 3-4 weeks later, we were stopped at railroad tracks and a coal train went by, and they said, Mama, what's that? She says, the coal train. And their eyes got big like saucers. They got animated and says, oh my goodness, there's got to be a lot of bad kids.
Oh my.
Break in here. I'm Mom. I've been listening to the whole thing.
Thank you for joining us, Doris.
So when we brought the girls home, we started them fresh on baby shots because we didn't know what shots they had and stuff. And so I had to go quite often for the first several months that they had been here. The girls had burn marks all over their arms from the burning embers from the grass fires.
Upper body.
Their upper body, yeah. So every time I went to the doctor, I usually had a new nurse, and each time the nurse would look at me like I had been burning them with like cigarettes. You could just see the shocked look at their face and the look that they gave. And I'd say, look at their file. I said, those are burning embers from grass fires.
Things I'm sure you never in your wildest imagination as a young woman, being the mother, having to sort of defend yourself for something that was really caring rather than anything else, huh? So Doris, what led you and Ken to make the decision to adopt all 5 of your children as you did?
I can only say that has to do with the Lord. Putting it into our mind that it was something that we should do. So I just contribute it to the Lord. And I gotta say this too. When the girls came, the palms of their hand and their feet were this beautiful salmon colored orange. So the first time we went to the doctor, I told him, look at their beautiful palms and the bottom of their feet. I said, they're just gorgeous colors. And he said, that's a sign of malnutrition because the girls came with bloated bellies. And he says, once you start getting nutrition in them, that skin color will disappear, which is what it did. But it was so gorgeous. But I'd rather have the skin tone they have now.
Aisha and Alicia, I'm sure you're glad you do too, huh?
Yeah.
What has it been like for you all to grow up in such a small town in Colorado from an inclusion perspective? How was that going to school?
So definitely now moving, like now being an adult and moving to Denver and having more diversity, I think that made me more aware of the lack of
We can't hear you, Aisha.
Oh, I was muted. All right. So being a child, we weren't as aware of the discrimination and the lack of cultural diversity as much as we are now being adults and being in Denver with more diversity has kind of opened my eyes to the lack of diversity in our small town. Like when we first started school and like kids would move to another table. Like at that time, it didn't make sense to us because we were so young, but being adults now, we can see the difference in diversity and in a more diversely inclusive city now.
I encourage the rest of you to chime in with questions along the way. I will keep asking until either I see something in the chat or someone unmutes and says, I have a question as well. So you have 3 siblings.
Mhm.
2 of you have 3 more siblings. How is it for them from that diversity perspective?
I'm not sure how it is for our siblings. I think it's nice that they have each other, that we're also all different, so we get different perspectives of the world and each other. But growing up together has been nice, and we're still all very connected, and we keep in contact. So we feel like normal siblings would.
And I would say like their diversity story is probably different than ours since they're Asian. I'm sure they've experienced their different experiences as well with, just being Asian and the race.
Yeah.
The girls had each other, which helped. And then the twin boys had each other, which helped. Because a lot of different things happened, but because they had each other, it was a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
So there's a question.
Yes.
How
Ms.
is it
Black.
reconnecting with your biological family?
Mhm.
So at first I guess it was unbelievable at first when our sister contacted us on Facebook and started talking to us. Because we had talked to one of her classmates through a social media app, and that's how she connected. And she started telling us about ourselves and showing pictures. So really, I felt like it was more God's doing. And we still stay in contact with our family. So it's nice to have that possibility of being able to contact them. And I think that's closed a lot of gap for me in our adoption story, and feeling like I could move past that feeling of like our birth parents giving us up. So that's helped a lot.
For me, since I'm really interested in writing a story about our life, like more in depth, hopefully in the next few years here to start on it, it's been helpful to contact them so they can kind of fill in more of the holes. I'm able to ask her questions and know like specific names and like dates of things. So that's been helpful to be able to contact them and be able to speak with them.
So you've talked about pursuing a teaching career, I believe, right?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and both of you think about teaching as well?
Yeah. So we're both supposed to be done here in May. We have to finish some praxis exams, and then we student teach, and the graduation's in May. We're both currently teaching in schools currently, though.
So what's the next step after you get your degrees and you're ready to go?
It would be transitioning into, although we're getting our teaching degrees, I feel like we've already had a lot of teaching experience. So our next step would be just to continue and find a school that we would like to be in, to stay permanently in.
Are you thinking staying here in Colorado or going somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm thinking of staying here in Colorado, specifically Denver schools, just to bring more diversity to certain schools.
Let me see a question.
Can you tell us a little more about issues faced by you and Olivia in her albinism?
Yes. So right now I currently actually have my daughter in school with me. She's in the younger age groups as I teach kindergarten. And I since we're both there together and want students and teachers and parents become aware that, I am her mom, it's led to a lot of questioning, and there have been a few incidents where ignorance comments have been made. So I've actually come into her classroom and educated teachers as well as the parents. And yeah, just advocating for her through school.
Alicia asks, what would you tell other families considering adopting and maybe adopting children from another culture?
I would say like don't overthink it. And that sounds weird, but a lot of times when you tell people they're adopted, they want to feel like sad for you or ask if you don't feel like you're all connected and as a family. And I think that kids learn to adapt and they learn to love, their parents that are raising them, and that it feels normal, like a regular family.
And of course, every child's going to come with different experiences, but I think it's more how you encourage them through the adoption process, and don't let the fear of possible rejection, I guess, stop you from adoption. Yeah. Oh, and I want to include another thing too. I guess just the realism of adoption, though. Realizing that the kids might need different supports in the sense of like what their backgrounds are if you're going to adopt internationally. So just as a parent, being aware of that, but don't let that scare you.
My apologies because I don't remember which one of you said it, but one of you said 10% of who we are comes from what happens to us, and 90% from who we already are. Or I may be not quite quoting you correctly.
Yeah, that's close.
And throughout your story, I was thinking, wow, that would feel like exactly in the reverse to me, because 90% of your life before you came to America was pretty intense and destructive. What led you to get to the place where you could be able to say it's not really about what happens to us so much as who we already are?
I think the outcome, like how our story turned out, that it was devastating and sad in the beginning, but it's turned out pretty good and we're like happy. And I'm thankful that things happened when we were young, because I feel like children are more forgiving and able to see the positive side of things. Plus, your life story does matter, but you're also able to invent who you are as a person. And you can either hold on to the past or look to the future and focus on the things you can't change.
Yeah. So Ken, what have you learned through all of this? Here you are, 14 or 15 years later from when you and Doris adopted the girls. What's been the learning adventure for you?
I think you just have to accept that every person is very unique and has their own needs, and you have to treat people accordingly. One of our twin boys has cerebral palsy as well. And so, all of the issues related to that and whatnot, you just do what you have to do. The girls had severe PTSD. And so there is a program called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which they went through a lot of that, and it was incredible what it did for them. But even that, they still couldn't quite get there. And so we actually hired a lady who was a retired professor from Penn State who taught them piano. And by teaching them piano, they were able to connect both sides of their brain. Whereas prior to that, you could go through a door, but it didn't connect necessarily that you could go through a door next to it. And so it brought it all together. And with that, you do whatever you have to do to make them successful. And then they graduated as honor students. So you just do what you have to.
I encourage you to ask questions as well. I have lots. However, I want to make sure other people have the opportunity to ask questions of interest to them.
I'm sorry to interrupt, guys, but I have to go back to my kids to teach. But Alicia will still be here.
Thank you, Aisha, so
Thank
much
you.
for giving us your time, and hug your little girl for us.
Okay, I will. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
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 Alicia, unmute so you can talk.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm still listening. I'm just getting in the car.
So, Alicia, I'm sure your dad filled you in that we've been sharing all kinds of stories in
Yes.
this effort through the See Me series on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as much as anything, frankly, to help those of us who participate, whose lives are not as complicated as yours have been already, to raise awareness, to educate. And in today's story, it's a great example of just learning some things about the distinction between conflict-free and blood diamonds. Thank you, Ken, for that context. It's that trying to figure out how to be more inclusive and aware and sensitive, I guess. What would you tell those of us who don't have the kind of experience you have had about how we ought to be differently so that people who do experience the kinds of things that you have experienced are included and welcomed and appreciated for who they are?
I would say take the time to listen to other people's stories, travel, and to like get out of our own circles and interact with different races and situations, just so we can get different perspectives on life. Yeah.
I would like to add too that I think growing up, the experience has been, they were pretty much always accepted, especially as long as they were with us, their parents. When they weren't with us, it was oftentimes a completely different story and treated completely different. But the acceptance versus inclusion are two different things. And so I think there were a lot of people who would brag that they knew us, but they wouldn't give us the time of day to ever speak to us. But they would be proud that they're not prejudiced because they know a couple of Black kids and a couple of 3 Asian kids. But that didn't mean that they included us in anything or even spoke to us. So there was a lot of that really a lot of isolation from not true inclusion.
So if you could go back in time, Ken, what would you say to those folks?
I don't know. I think there's just a lot of deep-seated prejudices out there, to be honest. And I don't think we can change it overnight. I think we always have to just treat people with kindness and hopefully, and advocate. So when you see things that aren't right, you have to speak up. And so we have done a lot of that, including having to write letters to the editor and calling for some politicians to resign and whatnot. So it is what it is, because you just can't let things go when they're really blatant.
If I remember correctly, Ken, you had an experience in your own little town around having to speak up recently. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, we did. Unfortunately, we knew somebody, a friend of ours, who actually spoke up and wrote a letter to the editor. She was a Caucasian lady, but it was really good that it wasn't just me speaking up and having to say, oh, here he goes again, but have somebody else with support of a bigger community. So I think that that's a good thing.
If you don't mind, can you fill in a little bit of what actually triggered all of that? If it's not uncomfortable for you to share.
Sure.
On the call.
Over Halloween, an individual put up decorations for Halloween of the lynching of a Black person with a lot of obscenities around everything written on their car. But we just didn't want to let it go. So there was a group of us that talked about it. I also spoke with individually. They couldn't do anything necessarily at the police department, the city manager, the assistant city manager, and a number of people, just to raise their awareness that people are noticing and watching. And then somebody else stepped up and wrote a letter to the editor as well.
My memory of that conversation that you and I had was that in a small town in particular, it's very difficult to take a stand and to speak up, and yet it's so important. And it sounds like you were fortunate that you had people in the community who were willing to stand with you.
Yes, definitely.
How was that for you, Alicia? I presume you probably saw it, or at least you knew about it.
I think, yeah, it was mostly like in classes and stuff, like during history class, you could see like the separation, but also when we graduated high school, a lot of people saw our lives, I guess, through a different lens, that we were just like these privileged kids that got adopted by a good family and we never went through anything. And it's not like we went in depth with everybody at the school about our lives, but I think they didn't see the difference that we're like living around not a culturally exclusive place or inclusive place, and that we had our own challenges. Yes.
I can imagine that it must feel like you're caught sometimes, at least, between telling all of the story so that people will really understand, versus why should I have to explain that, yes, my life has not been what you think it is?
Yeah, I guess I don't always feel the need to like tell everybody my whole story in order for them to like understand. Although I think people are closed-minded, even having us in their schools has helped them to be a little more aware than they would have been before. So I guess that's better than nothing, but yeah.
And at least for me, I can imagine that as you continue to write and speak your truth, all of us will benefit, because I'm looking forward to your book. Yes. And the many future opportunities you have to share your story in a way that is meaningful to you and so incredibly helpful to all of those who hear it or read it. So, Doris, advice from Mom. What would you say to the rest of us about how we can be different and therefore more caring and kind, to use Ken's word, and inclusive?
Well, first I want to say something else. When the girls would go to speech and debate, when they competed nationally, there would be a lot of Black competitors also. And they would speak with the girls, but they told them, you don't act like us. They didn't act like white people. They didn't act like Black people. So they were
in between worlds.
Yeah, in between worlds. So they've had to live with figuring all that out. As a mom,
Black enough.
not Black enough.
Not Black enough and not white. Wow.
Yeah.
But I will share one story of inclusion. Years ago, we took the family to Black Hills to see Mount Rushmore. We went through a very small town in Wyoming, and we went into the a restaurant there, and they were just excited to see our family, genuinely happy, spoke with them, and ended up saying, you know, you're going to get pie a la mode, and that's it. And they gave it to them for free. And then maybe 6-7 years later, we went back to the Black Hills and ended up going to the same restaurant again, same result, and they gave them ice cream, and we're just talking and just so happy to have them. So, I mean, it isn't all negative, but some places, even in little towns like in Wyoming, that you wouldn't expect, that, you know, people can really step up.
Yeah. Michelle has asked in the chat, are you still, Alicia, going to therapy, and what's been the most impactful thing you've learned as a result? You're on mute.
We are still not going through therapy, but the lady that we did therapy with, she's kind of like a family friend, and we've gotten to like know her, and it's been nice staying in contact and knowing that that she cared for us other than just us being people that she did therapy with. But I think one of the most important things that I've learned is that it's like okay not to be okay at the moment, that time creates change, and that you'll get through things.
Judy Thomas has posted in the chat, I think Ken makes a great point that there's a difference between acceptance and inclusion, I think is what you said. This is where many DE&I programs fail at organizations. It's not enough to accept, but we need to learn how to embrace. How do we do that?
I think we just accept people for who they are. We can't go through life colorblind. Everybody has differences, and you need them at their level, whatever their walk in life is, and just be open and honest and accepting. And I think that's about all it takes, really, if people could just do it.
And I think that looking at things like not being defensive and just being open-minded when people are talking to you, less of it like being a blame thing and more just understanding where everybody's coming from and their thought process and explaining and talking to each other.
So that makes me wonder, Alicia, what is an okay question to ask? And what's a please don't ask me that question?
I think it's okay to ask. I would say about any question, it depends like how you ask it and the words that you're using. Of course, if you're using racial slurs and stuff, that's not okay. But if you're talking to someone, you get to know them first before you ask more questions. But for the most part, I feel comfortable with people asking me questions as long as it's like respectful and they're like open to hear my side of it too as well.
And other than the racial slur example, what's a question you've been asked that you thought, why in the world would someone even think it was okay to ask that?
I can't really think about examples right now, but just when people are talking about like the difference between everybody being equal and like white privilege, I would say a lot is like for my classmates during around the protesting and that happened over like the Black Lives Matter and talking about the difference between like one of my classmates were asking me like he grew up poor and whatnot, and what was I experiencing racially when I like had everything. And I was just telling him, although you are a poor like white American, it's different than being like a person of color, and like the differences about how you're treated, and even with the different financial like standings, you're going to be looked at differently when you're like a Black rich person versus like a white poor person. But yeah.
There are a lot of automatic assumptions built in there, huh?
Yeah. And even with people from my college, just talking about racism in general and the differences between growing up in a white family and if you understand like how it is to be Black, and I don't know if you feel like your family supported you in learning who you are.
Michelle asks, do you ever want to go back to Sierra Leone?
I would like to go back. I feel like I wish I knew my family a little bit more for it to feel more comfortable, but I'm hoping to meet them one day because it would like complete the rest of my story, like getting to actually meet them. So hopefully that's something I can do in the future.
Pamela asks, as twins and sisters, did your healing journeys come about at the same time, frames, and in the same ways? Or did you find that your healing journeys were happening at different times, including your beautiful grace and wisdom to forgive those who hurt you?
I think Africa-wise, our healing journeys like happened at the same time, especially after talking to our family. And when we started going through school, having like encouraging teachers and stuff, we wanted to try and do better. I guess healing as a whole, we both like faced our own challenges, like my sister having her daughter and stuff. So we go through things differently, but having each other, we're able to talk with each other. And like, I feel like we're pretty healed, healed at different times, but yeah.
What did you observe, Ken and Doris, about how their healing journeys unfolded?
Well, I think Alicia was suffering from PTSD worse than her sister. And so she relied on her sister a lot. A lot of it came from trust. And there was actually a couple of breakthrough moments. One was when we went to a family reunion in the Seattle area. And they just knew leading up to it that they would be left there and not come back with us, just because of the insecurities of their lives. So once we went there and returned, and they knew that they were still with us, it was a whole new chapter within their lives and a new trust that came through. So I think that was a huge thing.
So the Finley family has joined us, and I presume that's part of your family, Ken.
As far as
If you would be willing, what would you tell the rest of us about the experience of being part of this remarkable family of love? Once you find your mute button.
We've got Trish, Nancy, and Stephen who can talk.
Take it away.
Hey, you put me on the spot. I wasn't paying attention. No, I can understand, because when we moved to Carbondale, and my sister was ahead of me, and I guess another sister and a brother, we were the only Asian kids. So I can see myself in the same position the two girls were in, or just your family anyways, because we grew up in Carbondale, Colorado. So there was a couple Mexican families, and then we were the only Asian, and there were no blacks in Carbondale at that time. But Carbondale was a very small coal mining community way back then. So it's not the same thing anymore. So I can relate to your experience, because I was just telling these guys when we were on mute that I had that same experience growing up. You were accepted, but you weren't included because, you didn't get invited to do a lot of things. And so I think as I've grown up and lived a vast majority of my life, I see that most people, even, the white people, I live here in Green River, Wyoming, everybody has their own struggles and everything. And they also want to be included, even if they fit in with the community, because I don't think most people really are all that open and have tons of friends and everything. So I think we're all in the same kind of boat. That's my viewpoint. So there you go. I rambled on long enough.
No, that was great. Thank you. How about you, Trish?
Well, I'm sorry, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I didn't quite catch the question. I was distracted, but just listening to Steve, I throughout my whole life, I guess I've never felt discriminated. We grew up in a small community outside of Amarillo, Texas. Then my parents divorced. I went to live with my dad. I went to school in Amarillo for only 1 year, and then I went back to a small town to live with an aunt and uncle. Spent a year there, then moved to Glenwood Springs, where I spent the rest of my time. And Glenwood Springs was much like Carbondale at the time, and just like Steve experienced, there were no black people and there were only a couple of Mexican families, but I guess I never felt any different than anybody else. And and I was never treated any different. And so it wasn't until I got to college that I experienced more diversity. And because my life had not been impacted, I accepted and included anybody. It didn't matter to me, and it extends to right now. Anybody and everybody is welcome in my home.
Thank you. And there was one more person in the family group who might have something to say, but my apologies, I didn't quite catch the third name.
Oh, this is Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, and like Trish, I don't feel like I was ever really discriminated either. I tend to ignore a lot of stuff around me. If it's bad, I don't like a lot of conflict. So in the work environment where I was working, it seemed like I was always trying to be the quiet mouse. But for some reason, my bosses always thought I had more potential. So they always made me get out there and do stuff. And I, became I succeeded very well in my occupation. And everybody, like Trish, everybody's included in my family, my personal life. I have adverse friends. I don't have a lot of them, but the ones I do have are, diversified. So I feel like if they want to be part of my life, then they'll either accept me or they won't. And so I try to get along with as best I can, and I volunteer a lot and try to help as many people as I can. So if everybody would do that and try to help their neighbors and their friends when they need it, then yeah, I think, the world would be a better place.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So, Alicia, what Nancy said triggered a thought for me because she said that her bosses encouraged her to get out there. What's it been like for you around either feeling the sense that you had to be better than or more successful than or a stronger student than everybody else by virtue of being Black and from Africa?
I think there became like a point in my life where I didn't like try to measure up to everybody else, where it's just like doing my best and doing what I could. Like I liked in our town that I got to create like our own stereotypes. There wasn't other Black people to be compared to. And then there was just a time in my life where I was tired of like struggling through school and just decided that I wanted to like make it, and then just did that for myself. Now when it comes to being better, I don't really feel like that. I'm just doing me, and the only competition is against myself. So I'm not really comparing myself to other Black people or other people in my life.
How about with your sister? Your dad said that you're both honor students, but what happens when it comes to competing with your sister?
My sister's never been like a true competition. Like maybe for competing in like duo or something competition, but we have different talents. I'm more, I wouldn't say talented, but I'm more of the writer, and my sister has her own like different talents. So we just encourage each other. We don't compete.
Greg has written in the chat, and I'm going to jump right to it because it's such a lovely way to say what I'm sure all of us are feeling. Thank you to the Richards family for sharing this powerful story. It has been great to hear and is inspiring.
You're welcome.
As I expected, Ken, you make us all want to be better.
Okay. And I did have, since it is Christmas, a picture of the Christmas when the kids were small. So I'll share that
Great.
for just a moment before we close, and we'll kind of wrap things up. So let me see if I can get there.
And while you do that, I'm going to ask you and Doris and Alicia for a last something to leave with the rest of us, that you would really like for us to remember and know and put in practice. So that's something to think about while we look at this great picture. Tell us the story of each one of these children and what ages they were at the time.
Well, it's hard to remember exactly the ages.
Boys
The-
came August of 99.
The boys were adopted in August of 1999. On the left is Andy, on the right is Alex. Then the picture of the two, Aisha on the left, Alicia on the right, and then our youngest is Anna. And all three of the girls' names start and end with A's, and the boys start with A's. So there are a lot of A's in the family.
So a piece of advice from each of you to the rest of us.
Be kind.
Be kind.
Don't let your past stop you from what you can do in the future.
No limits, no boundaries, right?
And don't be
Yes.
afraid of treating each person uniquely, and equity is better than equality.
Say a little bit more about that, Ken.
Everybody comes from a different position. And I don't know how many of you have seen like the classic picture of three people watching a baseball game.
Over
And
the fence, right?
over the fence. And, you know, equal is everybody has a chance to look over the fence, but not everybody has the ability to actually see over the fence. So not only, you know, some people need help, whether it's a ladder or whatever, to be able to see. And once you can see, to actually be included in the baseball game as well. So I think it's just including people for who they are and celebrating our differences.
So be kind. Don't let your past keep you from being what you want to be in the future. Remember that equity is the point, and being compassionate and inclusive is really, at the end of the day, the goal. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'll tell you a quick story that our youngest said when she was still in preschool, and she came up to me and stared at me and looked me in the eye and said, "Daddy, it's okay, you're pink. I'm sure God loves people of all colors." So she learned at a young age that just accept you for who you are.
Yes. So several people have written in the chat, what a beautiful family you have, and what a gift it is to us to get to hear your story and the power of love to share for the holidays.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. I hope that you found it as heartwarming as I certainly did. And I hope for all of you, safe, healthy, happy, joy-filled, and successful holidays and into the new year. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful
Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.